G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and so far you are having a fantastic week. Now today has been a very, very big day, and of course today what we have seen is that no one believes warfare is linear or constant anymore, or at least those genius mathematicians have fallen silent, because what we have seen is we have seen Russian elements move up, not only up to the main Donbass line, but beyond that as well. And as we have spoken about on this channel for months and months and now years, is that warfare is not linear, it is not constant, it more moves like bankruptcy, that it's little by little and then you will have a fall off a cliff at some point. And are we there? Well, the next days and weeks will tell us this, but it does appear that it may be, and that territory is only ever a byproduct of attrition when your primary goal of attritional warfare is attrition of the forces and, of course, increasing on your own strengths. So we're going to be looking at this movement up and beyond that first and final defensive line that was meant to be another one of these wonder weapons. So we're going to look at what has occurred, how this influences politics. We know there's an incredibly important meeting happening on the 15th between, of course, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump about this war and the ammunition that this gives, because at the end of the day, diplomats are a servant to the warrior at the front line. And then we're going to talk about that politics a little bit more and what's going on. And then we're also going to look at, can Russia reintroduce maneuver warfare? This is something you and I have spoken about a lot and speculated on if it's possible or if it's not. And again, yet to be seen, but what would have to be met to reintroduce mechanized maneuver warfare into this style of environment? So we have, of course, as always, a lot to go over. So if you don't know what I'm speaking about, the first thing is we're going to do is going to go onto the maps. Of course, here is Ukraine, the center of your screen. Of course, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, and the red check ground that has been made over the last 24 hours. Now, this map is only ever a baseline for us. This is what is approved to be released by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. We know this map has gone against that before, and there was massive speculation. There was threats against the producers of this. But we can see we are a lot zoomed out here, and you can still see where this movement has become, following on from yesterday's movement all the way beyond Zoloty Kolodiyaz, and that this is catastrophic in here. And just on today, if we go the maximum areas, you're talking over 11 kilometers. But if you look at other mappers and what they're saying, some are saying it's up to 19 kilometers. The grey zone, of course, near Marivkia, breaking this highway that runs Dobropilya, Kramatorsk, and there's more and more channels, Russian and Ukrainian, saying that there are DRG elements, those then reconnaissance sabotage forward operating groups of the Russian forces in and around Dobropilya. So if we were to go from the absolute base of this to up in here, you're talking over 15 kilometers that is accepted by this map of grey zone and where that main fortification sits. And this is from Mr. Clement Molan. Again, I try and show everyone everyone's name where you can go and follow them, in this case on Twitter, on the sources and the maps that I use. And you can see Dobropilya, Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk. You can see where the main Donbass line has then come to and crossing with relatively little resistance. Are there losses? Will there be losses? Of course there's going to be. This is a massive state war. But take, for instance, pushing through this line, and you can see what's beyond this line compared to the Surovikin line in 23 and the resistance felt and the amount of resource allocation. And many bloggers, they're reporting this as a new breakthrough that's just occurred. And this isn't a new breakthrough. It's just the byproduct of months and years of attrition, command mistakes, and a lack of accountability, particularly from a lot of these public figures as well. And it's only the result that is new, but this has been in action for many months. While everyone is that Russia is falling apart because of the loss of one village in Sumy, ignoring what is actually happening here and ignoring the clear as day doctrine around attritional warfare and what becomes of this. And that breakthrough is just a byproduct of collapse, that in attrition you're looking to rot your enemy. You're not looking to win. You're looking for them to lose. And of course, we all get this language wrong, myself included. We may call this a breakthrough, but this is more of a collapse of the line that's opened the opportunity for this breakthrough. The outcome may be the same, but it is, you get there through a different calculation. And this is the primary objective of attritional war, to collapse instead of push through. And it's not that you win, you focus on having your enemy lose. And there is currently in the informational sphere absolute desperation to control the narrative around this at the moment. So as I always say, take everything with a grain of salt, try and take in as many sources as you can. If you're just taking me as your only source, no, just spread out amongst as many as you possibly can and you'll get a clearer picture. Now, let's have a look at this before we step into exactly what has occurred. As we have gone over for years around the doctrine of the art of attrition, you seek to overwhelm the enemy at multiple points with shallow attacks, remaining inside your layered bubble of friendly protective systems, really around 15 kilometres. That's not just counter-UAV electronic warfare, but also your mid-range fires, barrel, as well as glide, as well as drone. While you stretch depleted enemy reserves until the front line collapses. If you're numerically superior, you stretch and stretch and stretch, you don't open up Kursk. Only then should the offensive extend towards objectives deeper in the rear. Concentration of forces on one main effort should be avoided, as this gives the indication of offensive's location opportunity for the enemy to concentrate the reserves against this key point. So one area, and be mass concentration against that. We still see a lot of pressure from Konstantinivka to Kupiansk to down in the south and in Kherson as well. So Ukraine can't just bring everything to fold in here, but I will speak about what I believe Ukraine need to do right now to stop this catastrophe that is unfolding. We continue on the doctrine. The goal is to force the enemy to expend vital material and strategic reserves on strategically meaningless operations. A key pitfall is to avoid being dragged into the very same trap, Kursk, and then it became Sumy. Strategically, overall, the capture of one or two villages there, but tying up your best offensive units, it doesn't make sense. But the doctrine, and we go by this, not off just pure emotion. When the second phase begins, after you've met the requirements of attritional war, you overwhelm at multiple points using these shallow attacks inside of those protective systems until there collapses. What you're looking for at that point is then a cascading effect in when a crisis in one sector forces defenders to shift reserves from another sector only to generate a crisis there in turn. So you create a crisis here, and then Kupiansk, where you're going to have to move reserves, or wherever, can create crisis, and you never have enough plugs to plug the holes. As forces start falling back and leaving prepared fortifications, morale plummets with the obvious question: if we can't hold the mega fortress, how can we hold the new trenches? Retreat turns into rout. Only then should the offensive extend towards objectives deeper in the enemy rear. We're going to go over what Clement Molan says, one of the best analysts in this, about manoeuvre armour, and then I'm going to go over what I believe of manoeuvre armour because it's slightly different. But this is the thing. Look at his map here. How are you feeling around other areas of this at the moment? We already know there's a morale crisis, there's manpower catastrophe, there is a desertion catastrophe as well. The attritional strategy is centred on defence. Again, it's centred on creating collapse, not breakthrough. It's a byproduct. It is counterintuitive to most Western military officers. Western military thought views the offensive as the only means of achieving a decisive strategic goal of forcing the enemy to come to the negotiating table on favourable terms, on our terms, and that we will be dictating. Again, you need to know this before we step into the frontline movements, what the goals are, as well as then the political outcome of this as well. So let's look over what exactly has occurred. And again, one of the guys absolutely knocking it out of the park and finally getting the recognition he deserves is this Mr. Playfair here. The Zoloty Kolodiyaz catastrophe. For anyone asking what the hell, why, and how. Again, you can see where these lines are sitting, where then the defence Donbass line, those fortifications, those promised fortifications have been pushed over. And as I've seen someone worded, I think it was Tajirigami, but don't quote him or I on that because it's just off memory, is it wasn't a breakthrough. It was a walkthrough. And I've always said, it doesn't matter what you have. If you don't have infantry, you're in trouble. This thread will be more raw than others. No sugarcoating, 101% objectivity. As discussed in my previous thread, there are multiple reasons for this breakthrough, the main of which are completely inadequate command, sheer amount of Russian resources that were committed, Ukrainian disorganization, new Russian mobile groups that simply bypass scattered Ukrainian resistance points. They use that to build up forces, leverage off that, sow chaos, bring in the paint by numbers of movement or of attrition that we are seeing. Maneuver position attrition. This breakthrough was not opened because of one reason in particular, but all of them. And it's all a combination at different points in time of successive and simultaneous military actions. The main tactic for the Russians in this direction is almost completely based on infantry, very likely with motorised attachments, bikes and motorcycles. No mechanised component was noticed. We'll talk more about that in a minute. At the moment, according to my information, the breakthrough is packed full of Russian foot infantry who are accumulating behind the line. We can easily guess without any type of Ukrainian resistance. And then, with the same amount of resistance, simply walking or having motorcycles ride to new positions further north. Let's not joke around. My fellow pro-Ukrainians, the situation is catastrophic. This breakthrough, as explained in my previous thread, not only threatens big tactical advancements, but also the encirclement of the whole Donbass region. As I've been saying, my theory of bankruptcy, little by little, and then we see something like this, and it's only going to be a matter of time. A key part of Putin's claims for negotiations, of course, the Donbass. Together, the push to Sandrove, Liman, constituting the northern pincer. The total confirmed length of this breakthrough reaches 15 kilometres. Unconfirmed length is at about 19 kilometres. Addressing whoever says this cannot be considered a breakthrough, I advise you to have a look around Deep State's updates for the past 3 years and then come back here and tell your opinion. Or look at the claims of breakthrough in the 23 offensive. In the last 3 years, this is the largest single day beyond that initial shock and awe of war. This is the largest day that I can remember as far as one axis. What I will say, 19 kilometres is approximately 12 miles. Go and walk 19 kilometres. It's a very, very long way through areas that should have been catastrophically costly to move through these defensive fortifications that were spent hundreds of millions of hryvnias and billions of hryvnias. The real problem here, no matter what anybody says, is infantry. And finally, we are seeing these people wake up that this manpower cannot be replaced, that manpower is the war at the end of the day. And all these people now have gone, oh my God, there's a manpower crisis that you and I have been speaking about for over a year. Maybe we'll see them sign up, but people going, we need to mobilise more. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't mean you go get this guy and send him to the line. He's not going to be useful. He's either just going to desert or die. It takes 6 minimum months to 12 more likely to actually take someone to that point in time. This is a war of drones. That is true. But infantry remains the king of war. No one can seize or hold terrain like infantry. Infantry defend positions, captures them, controls territory. After the smaller Rezene breakthrough, the Russians encountered resistance in the form of urgently redeployed National Guards. And as they always do, slowed down and sensed for weak points. You're searching for the best position to come through. In this case, the weak point was found north of Nikolaevka, already on July 20th. After this, the Russians sent mobile infantry groups to flood the weak spot with infantry, which very simply bypassed hastily set up Ukrainian strongpoints, as you can see in the photographs here of where in the direction of Shakhovka and Novoshakovka, Bryansk, where they were pushing. But this weak point was not weak in terms of drones, but weak in terms of infantry. Drones in this particular sector were able to indeed slow the Russians for a good while, but it is infantry who defends the trench system when the drones fail. What have I been saying? There's an over-reliance on drones. Over-reliance on drones, and no one's seeing that there's manpower issues. And the catastrophic shortage of infantry described as such by Deep State, this was bound to happen sooner or later. And there's a part of me that's actually surprised it's taken this long. Summing up this section, multiple problems are to blame for this breakthrough, but the most important of them is, of course, infantry shortage, which created a weak spot that the Russians always exploit immediately. And you exploit then a opportunity given. Let's go to the damage assessment. The Dobropilia-Kramatorsk road was physically cut near Novovdyanne, according to many reliable reports, where this grey zone is in here, creating a whole issue everywhere up and down the Donbass. Russian DRG are preparing the northern pincer for Dobropilia, with multiple reliable sources stating that they are at the doors of Belozersk. Russian DRGs, according to the sources from both sides, are in the doors of Dobropilia. Russian forces, having encountered resistance at Rodianske, opened a new opportunity to encircle Pokrovsk. Minograd agglomeration, with some isolated reports talking about DRGs in Hersheny from the Dobropilia direction, not the Udashne Kotlene. So not Udashne Kotlene, but around Rodianske. And what we can see if we step back onto Ukraine's own map yesterday was this push around Sorozove on Rodianske area, and how critical this whole sector is at the moment for pushing much, much deeper. The Russians can now fold the front further towards Konstantinivka, of course, above Toretsk, we'll speak of in a second, breaking the already precarious balance created here by the emergency reinforcements moved after the Novolenivka breakthrough on May 1st. The Russians, having breached Ukraine's first and only defensive line, has open operational space only composed of rural areas to advance further north in the direction of Bavinkove and Sloviansk to cut off Ukrainian-controlled Donbass, together with the northern Liman pincer described above. We'll look at that as this is the pincer you and I have been speaking about for some time. So we see this movement. These are areas we just spoke of, Belitske, Rodianske. Then this is the envelopment happening around Pokrovsk, physically cutting these final roads. This movement into Dobropilia, Belozersk, this movement up that is happening. Also putting Konstantinivka, that pocket developing. I'll show you this pocket in Konstantinivka in massive amounts of trouble. We can see where they are further enveloping out of Chasiv Yar, now on the already pocket within a pocket around Katarinivka that has occurred. But then we zoom out a little bit further, and what have we been talking about? Terny, Siversk. Do not underestimate the importance of this, and this is then what we see. Liman, this is the Terny front that we hear of. Siversk sits there on my cursories, and this movement around Banakove down to Liman, and this overall getting in behind those defences around Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and that's what we speak of. The defences are made for a most likely axes of attack. But if it attacks on different axes, their efficiency, their effectiveness are significantly reduced. Let's continue. The sudden effort is not only to be tied to tactical reasons like the ones that can be discussed above, but also political ones. Putin is clearly showing that he can attempt these kinds of pushes, and not only attempt them, but create them and exploit them. That if he wants something, he will be determined to take it, and that he's doing a favour by offering Ukraine this type of deal, specifically giving up remaining parts of Donbass. So what he's showing is I can do this if I want. I can do it. I'm offering you an olive branch, maybe a flaming olive branch, as Big Serge puts it, but it's a favour by offering you this because I'll take it this way. And we know a transactional businessman like Trump, how he's going to be seeing this. Clausewitz says, we talk about this is war, is politics by other means. It's merely a continuation of that. But also the result of war is never final, but the immediate result is in the hands of the victor. So that it is carved out by the sword, but then written in by the pen. But it will not ignore the front line. We know that from history of war back when it was sticks and stones. This breakthrough from the bright side for Ukraine has the potential to stir up something big internally regarding command reforms that contend number one place for the most urgent problem to solve in the Ukrainian army, along with manpower. And what I will say, to be cold shock bearer of bad news, this hasn't been done in 3.5 years, even when things were going successfully. I have no hope that it's going to happen now. And even if it did happen today with massive reforms and massive mobilisation, it will take years to actually see that impact the battlefield. It is 3.5 years too late for these reforms that people like me have been speaking about, and manpower, it's been years beyond that. Zhuzny in 23, 500,000 men pushed out the door because of it. The Americans said that too. And it's not a bright side for this, because even if, maybe more people are looking at it now and not ignoring it, it's too late for that. It's too little too late, in my opinion. I'm not saying that this is going to break through anywhere, but it's way too late to be speaking about these reforms now when we have the presidents of Russia and America meeting on Friday and this sort of movement today to counter this. According to my information, Ukraine has urgently redeployed to the breakthrough at least 92 assault brigade from the Kharkiv front. Again, now it's deployed. There's not some mythical reserve element sitting somewhere. It means that these guys are gone from a front where we may then see advancement. Together with other units, which I'm not allowed to name because of the crazy OPSEC that is going on there, and everybody noticed since mid-June the fall of Koptyeve and Razine. So people are moving from areas. Again, you push on multiple different areas of the front line as per the doctrine we said. Is this enough? Extremely likely not. Again, I believe Ukrainian forces are going to have to make a strong decision immediately to shorten the front somewhere and free up units, because I think it's clear to everyone that the blanket is too short. What I would logically do is withdraw completely from the Oskil bridgehead and Siversk, defending itself from three sides and lengthening the front significantly, which would, though, interfere with great organisation with the units they have gained in the past years. But I'm an Ausinter, not at all a commander. What I would do is acceptance of areas that are going to fall anyway, but you can collapse the control. So it's going to collapse, but you can control the collapse. Apologies. So what I would be doing is right now, I would be fully withdrawing Pokrovsk, Siversk, Konstantinivka to redeploy to stop this. I would pull back Pokrovsk, pull back Konstantinivka, pull back in Siversk as well. Shorten that front line to stop this. Pokrovsk is going to fall anyway. It is going to fall, but now this has occurred. This is a bigger issue than losing Pokrovsk. Okay, you can see where this is coming for the remainder of the Donbass. There needs to be immediate, serious actions put forward, even if it is somewhat hasty. Now, random reminder that meanwhile, there is some commander who is forcing the Ukrainians to cling to operationally encircled fields that are currently being supplied through drones. A bit of standard foot infantry, a tiny bit of vehicles, mostly for rotations, and boats through the reservoir. Now think about Zoloty Kolodiaz. Congratulations, you discovered what one of the main problems of the Ukrainian army consists of. When people say there's this methodical withdrawal from areas to attrit the Russians, what doesn't show that is the fucking map. It does not show that we have what is occurring in Pokrovsk surrounded on three sides, this breakthrough in here, but then we also come down into this Kateryninivka front line, and what we can see is the only way air in and out of here is here, that there's an encirclement in here. Troops like this, they need to be pulled out, methodically withdraw as well as you can to try and supply support to areas that will be far more devastating than losing Kateryninivka. But we have seen over years that there is absolutely no appetite to give up a square of strategically unimportant ground for the sake of attrition or saviour of other areas. And that's why we never understood Kursk, to force the enemy to expend vital material and strategic reserves on strategically meaningless operations. And that's a trap you can fall into. Clement Molan says this: why is there no more tanks used by Russia? Because they're waiting for a big push, when there will be no more anti-tank ditches and fewer effective drone teams. They will come back, don't worry. Replying to this tweet saying, for those saying Russia isn't using armoured vehicle assaults anymore because they've run out. No, because they've proven less effective than motorbikes and buggies. Well, here it is. And this is what we see, is we do know that Russia is producing armour 24/7 and massively replenishing stocks and growing in that amount as well. And that is still a big if at this point in time, if Russia can reintroduce mechanised manoeuvre warfare into the war behind fortifications, it would be a disaster. And that has the potential to do Soviet deep manoeuvre warfare doctrine under fires and reach areas like the Dnieper instead of just then the Donbass. And that is catastrophic it's a big if that actually can be reintroduced. But if it's going to be reintroduced, it's going to be behind these specific anti-tank elements. What is the best counter for any anti-tank, say, fortifications or drone teams is attrition of infantry, because infantry will always be number one. I've said this about air defence, that air defence is important, but if you have to, you'll move someone from the Air Force or air defence onto the front line to seize and hold or to hold ground. And that is the thing, is you keep pushing on the front and eventually it thins out all these other areas. Now, continue on this idea around then potential of mech manoeuvre as well. And there's this good write-up by ISW. You know, I'm massively critical of the ISW, but this is a fairly good document on Ukraine, the problem of restoring manoeuvre in contemporary war. Now, this was talking from an idea of how can Ukraine reintroduce manoeuvre, but we can take the same lessons and go, well, then how would Russia reintroduce manoeuvre in this type of battlefield? And you need sensor suppression. You need electronic warfare, counter UAVs, decoys, blind and confusing all of those sensors in the battlefield as well. But suppression of these two can be through attrition. Firepower, neutralization, target and destroy artillery, rocket systems, missile units, reducing that fire. You exploit the weak points, as we have seen happen. You identify and strike these sectors. You have rapid breach operations. You clear mines, obstacles quickly, get in behind that line, which we're sort of seeing. Exploitation force readiness, keep mobile units positioned and supplied to surge through gaps immediately after a breach. So once there's a breach, you surge and exploit that area, leverage off that, and accumulate behind that. Sequential offensives, as you've heard me say 1 billion times over, simultaneous and successive operations, smaller rapid attacks, multiple areas within friendly bubbles of influence as per doctrine. Multi-domain disruption, it's combined arms, it's everything from intelligence operations through to army operations on the front line, long-range fires, troops, tanks, absolutely everything. Speed to consolidation, that you have to push quickly enough to secure gains before the enemy can re-establish a defensive line. Now, we're still, in my opinion, a fair way off seeing this, but again, we need to take into account how slowly things can move over years, and then look at Syria, and then you have a huge change. And this isn't just me and some of these other bloggers calling out the catastrophic situations going here. You have Mr. Bohan Krotovich. He was a lieutenant colonel and chief of staff for the defense of Mariupol, with an open letter to President Zelensky. I sincerely don't know what exactly is being reported to you, but I'm informing you. On the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka line, without exaggeration, it is complete chaos. And we have heard that the information is just not getting to Zelensky about the reality of the situation. And many people are saying that's because everything that goes to Zelensky has to be fed through Yamak, and it's just not getting there. And this chaos has been growing for a long time, worsening with each passing day. The command structures currently being appointed, or already appointed, to fix the unfixable will most likely be blamed for the chaos that's already unfolding. A stable line of combat contact, as such, effectively doesn't exist. Pokrovsk and Mitrograd are almost surrounded. Konstantinivka is in a semi-encirclement. The enemy is advancing toward Kramatorsk and Druskivka, the most important areas that sit in the remainder of the Donbass. But again, in behind this fucking fortification line, that is critical. Let's see in his continuation of this. And this, second one. Now, the problem has been escalating since last year. This was publicly warned about. Although what I will say is very few with a large audience actually raised these concerns, and I know they'll take no accountability for it, but I think there's a lot of people on this website and on Twitter who have blood on their hands for ignoring this, because we were told when people raise concerns that you're a sympathiser, you're a propagandist, you're this, you're that, and the message was no matter what, trust the ZSU and trust these commands. That we're seeing these guys talk around and go, there's been problems here and no one's done anything about it, because people hide it, or if you raise this, you work for the FSB suddenly. And it has come to pass exactly as predicted. The cause of this problem isn't the newly formed corps that inherited a disastrous situation from understaffed subordinate units or from these areas in command, which for the past year and a half have effectively managed nothing, merely passing on orders in accordance with directives from the general staff, or that no matter what, trusts the ZSU, that led to the catastrophic system of what we've got. The systemic problem begun with the depletion of reserves, the widespread fragmentation of units across the entire front, reports of captured villages being touted as victories amidst failures of entire sectors. Right in here, Kursk and Sumy, that all these fucking YouTubers, Russia's collapsing, one village is being lost in Sumy. Meanwhile, the whole of Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, is getting fucking encircled. The allocation of mobilised resources to cronies and the complete lack of strategic or even operational vision of the theatre of operations among parts of the military leadership. I'm an officer. I have a sense of dignity. My conscience is clear. And what I will say about this too is I can't believe that there are people on these websites who have clear consciences, who fully believe what they are actually saying. And I'm even seeing people today raising money going, yeah, I'm raising money now for this. And you're like, brother, go and fucking fight. That's the manpower's number one. He continues. This is exactly what we're talking about restoring positions and assaults that lead to greater losses than during defence. Right now, restoring positions through assault operations at the moment when your front is cracking at the seams. Unit rotations are completely unrealistic. There are gaps in defence and there are no reserves at the operational level. That this is illogical. Exactly what we have been speaking about for these massive successes in other areas. I suggest reviewing the losses of individual units during assault operations and considering whether it's worth starting to distribute mobilisation resources, including to ground force brigades, airborne assault troops, National Guard, which are directly holding the front line. First, stabilisation, strengthening defence, building up reserves, and only then assault or counter-offensive operations. Exactly what we've been saying is it doesn't make sense to be going on fucking the offensive at the moment. To stabilise the front, brigades at the line of contact need to be reinforced with infantry, among other things. Next, systematising command and control while simultaneously building up reserves. Let me remind you that reserves exist for repelling counterattacks, reinforcing difficult sectors, closing breakthroughs, replacing units that have suffered losses and lost combat capability, increasing the resilience of defences, and yes, for the potential development of success in case, damn it, we achieve an advantage and transition to the offensive. So they're meant to exist for this, for repelling these sectors, not just for limited optical victories. This is what happens when one is fighting a doctrinal attritional war and one is fighting an optical attritional war. You have this. In case of an advantage is achieved, we are definitely not in that position right now. Hang on, Mr. Bohan. I know, Mr. Bodan, you are a commander here and a lieutenant colonel within some of the most largest urban battles that we have ever seen. But people on Twitter are telling me that Russia is about to fall apart and they're not in a position of advantage at the moment. This isn't quick, it's painful, but it's realistic. We just need to stop and start building a system. We cannot fight like Russia, which has numerical superiority, and I would say at the moment tactical superiority, because they have found tactics that are working. But justifying our mistakes with Russia's numerical advantage is deceiving ourselves. Again, I agree with everything he says, but starting to build this new system now, when we have this, the years that it would take, in my opinion, trying to see in peacetime how long it takes to fix operational problems like that, I just don't see it. Konrad Mazuka from Roshan Consulting, he talks about the situation at the front. He says, since 24, Ukraine has effectively neutralised Russia's advantage in artillery and manpower through intensive drone production. I disagree, as we have seen the drones actually become a Russian advantage as well, and counter UAS as that too, but we'll continue. In the meantime, however, after temporary successes related to mobilisation, reality set in. The scale of desertions and losses has caused the Ukrainian army, particularly its infantry component, to shrink. And we have seen that. The Ukrainian army is getting smaller, and at the same time, the Russians have not only replenished their losses, but have also increased the size of their forces in Ukraine. Thus, both sides have found themselves on a completely different trajectory. And this is why I say the attrition rate of population may not fit the attrition rate needed at the very front line. The people say, by population, you're 3 or 4 to 1. Okay, fair enough. By population. But if you cannot mobilise people, it's impossible to do because people are hiding or fleeing, whatever, and don't want to go, then you've got mass AWOL, no one's recruiting. Well, outside is growing. That is way further than a population advantage at that point in time. And of course, found themselves on different trajectories. The most concerning change compared to 24, even February of this year, is the appearance of Rubicon sub-units at the front, Russia's Centre for Advanced Unmanned Systems. This unit trains highly qualified instructors and drone operators whose actions are exceptionally coordinated and systematic. Each sub-unit is assigned its own sector. This also applies to general military brigades and regiments, where drones conduct continuous operations, but not only strike Ukrainian soldiers, but also intercept Ukrainian drones, both combat and logistical ones. The sheer presence often prevents Ukrainian artillery and drones from operating. Plus, Russia have absolutely world-leading electronic warfare counter-drone systems. You don't hear about it that much, but I can tell you from anyone you talk to behind the scenes who knows what they're on about, it is fucking very, very worrying for people in this space. Ukrainian defense previously relied heavily, previously relied heavily on drones. I'd say it relied completely on drones, which is why I've said for a long time now there's over-reliance on drones, because now this solution is becoming less effective. This is the problem you're left with. Rubicon has changed the nature of operations on the front. Russian strikes have become more precise, coordinated, and focused on systematically weakening Ukrainian combat capabilities. As a result, it is increasingly difficult for Ukrainians to conduct offensive operations, and at the front, in many places, has become a zone of constant and persistent threat to them. 15-kilometre bubble, and of course, that friendly bubble that Russia is working within as well to move these areas forward. If this trend continues, and will likely do one of those ones, even localised Ukrainian counterattacks will require enormous resources and will carry out a high risk of losses. Not even that. Ukrainian withdrawals will have that too. The advantage in drone warfare may also enable Russians to gradually and later more rapidly force Ukrainian withdrawals and repositioning without the need for classic costly infantry assaults. Instead, rapid raid operations will take precedence, and these moving and then leveraging, we may see reintroduction. In the medium term, we do not expect a significant improvement in the situation. I expect a significant deterioration. Ukrainians will undoubtedly strive to partially restore balance, especially in the realm of drone operations, but no one can predict how long this will take. Yes, in drone operations, and I know that's what he's specifically speaking of, but drones are a form of artillery and a battlefield effective and efficient weapon. But it is a form of artillery. At the end of the day, you still need infantry in the line. It can drones increase the cost for your enemy, it does, but it does not seize and hold terrain, as we are seeing, especially that Russia has overtaken a superiority in drone numbers and the electronic warfare and just the evidence of the front line that we are seeing. But of course, this comes at a fucking terrible time. But before we get there, we speak about this Le Mans-Tournai front, and what we see is by Syriac, Russia is pushing pretty hard here as well by Syriac maps, okay? And we see that it's not only today that we see the map moving, but then we see yesterday as well, now of course overshadowed by this news, but Belatsk, Toretsk, this area in Catastrophic coming to the north of Chasiv Yar, all of this as well, pushing on multiple different axes at once. That creates that massive problem if you're numerically inferior and don't have a developed tactic that is working. And we know, I don't care what Europe and Zelensky is saying about we require all this territory, require NATO, require this. This today has given another card in the deck for Putin, because it's showing, well, then we can advance 10 Ks. And this is what President Trump said. I was a little bothered by the fact that Zelensky was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap, because there will be some land swapping going on. I know, through Russia and through conversation with everybody, for the good of Ukraine. And what I'll say is for the survival of Ukraine as well. He says there's going to be some bad stuff for both. At this point in time, I could see Putin rocking up and going, look, I'm going to present Trump with this, that I want to take this, knowing Ukraine's not going to accept it, but not wanting Ukraine to accept it either, if him and his commanders believe that they're on the eve of that spaghettification singularity point of collapse. And I just don't get how people don't think that Ukraine's going to be walking into this and walk out with everything they're requiring. That might be moral, it might be right, it might be ethic, but what I'll say is ethics and morals subjective, that Putin believes he's just as moral and ethic as anyone else, as Zelensky does. So that has no play there. And for the US to come in and try and play high and mighty on this and go and approach the world community on this while supporting what's occurring in Gaza, well, you're not going to be taking the fucking high road on this as well. Again, the diplomat is a servant of the warrior. The pen only signs what the sword has already taken. That negotiations do not replace the battlefield. They ratify it. And I'm not saying that Putin's going to walk out of this with his maximalist demands. But his maximalist demands, he is significantly closer to that than Zelensky and Europe's maximalist demands. It does look like Putin could achieve those maximalist demands over a number of months or years. some would say it looks like it could be more. There is nothing that shows that Ukraine can achieve their maximalist demands. Again, I said if you had where Zelensky is sitting and where Putin is sitting across a sliding scale, the reality of the battlefield that will be ratified by the pen is significantly further this way. And if you believe that this is going to step in and be dictating the terms, you're going to get an awful fucking shock when you've got a realist, realpolitik person like Trump sitting there sorting this out. And especially with a front line that is looking like this. And it'll be surprising what tomorrow looks like in the next days. Maybe it will stop, but maybe it won't. And at some point it won't. Much like the economy of attrition and bankruptcy, we have bits like this. Legends. I'm going to go over the bit because this bit I don't want right at the end to speak about tomorrow from a Swedish officer. Anyway, have a fantastic day and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.